Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of this Final Fantasy VII Rebirth analysis series. I'm Nökkvi from Birds of Play, and I'm once again joined here by Peter from Birds of Play.
Hello.
And the one and only Alleyway Jack.
Hello.
Who still hasn't reached 10,000 subscribers.
Not quite.
Get on it. But just so you can understand the sort of full extent of how amazing Alleyway Jack is, I think I'm going to pass the reins on to him and ask him to catch us up on where we are, if that's okay.
Sure thing. Once again, happy to take the reins here. So we've discussed the game to date. We've gone through the myriad of things that each of these chapters offers, whether that's progression of the story or progression of new content and mechanics for us to engage with, of which there is a lot in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So if you, for some reason, have landed on this episode first, I'd recommend going back and checking those out. In the episode immediately preceding this one, we were looking at the Costa del Sol, which was a slightly wacky and amusing reprieve, and sparsely clad reprieve as well for some characters from what we'd seen in the action so far. And then we proceeded to climb up Mount Corel. And this is a moment where Barrett Wallace and his backstory tended to open up a little bit more, and we're seeing a bit more of his character and a bit more of a subplot open up with Barrett there, which leads us into this chapter and some of the things that go on here. So having left off the previous episode, we were riding a cart up to the Gold Saucer. So now kicking off this chapter, we're going to be exploring the Gold Saucer proper. And I think this location was another hotly anticipated one from how it would adapt and bring to life the source material a little bit more, because the Gold Saucer was a rather surreal and wacky sort of theme park in the original game that has now been brought to life in Rebirth.
And they did change it a lot, right?
Yes, yeah. And I feel like they had to change it because you could get away with, in the 90s, in Final Fantasy VII proper, you had these wacky, super deformed graphics. You could get away with these goofy, funny things like, for example, when Cloud Strife dresses up as a girl to change back into his normal clothes, he sort of spins around on the spot, and it's just there's a lack of reality there, but the game didn't really require it because of how it was designed, I suppose, and how those graphics sort of allowed it to be removed from reality a little bit more. However, with the new Final Fantasy VII, a lot of it is riding on the realism of it, the realism of the designs, the realism of the world. And so I feel like things like the Gold Saucer had to be a little bit more plausible. So where in the original game, you're traversing it by jumping into these little tunnels, and it's a very impractical theme park, like jumping into these tunnels and going around. I mean, the accessibility alone is pretty terrible. So here, yeah, it's a lot more real. And yeah, I quite liked it. How did you feel about the setting in general?
I got a really nice sort of Balam Garden from Final Fantasy VIII vibe from the whole place, which I really sort of enjoyed. And I can see maybe you agreed.
Yeah, there were some sort of aspects of the architecture that were reminiscent of Balam Garden from Final Fantasy VIII, but they didn't go like all the way with it at the same time. But one of the sort of biggest differences, and we briefly touched on this in the last episode, I think, is that it's very interesting how they changed how you sort of enter the Gold Saucer from North Corel, because it's not the main entrance. You enter through the staff entrance, and you sort of it's a back entrance, and it makes the connection between North Corel and the Gold Saucer a little bit different. Whereas in the original game, it was sort of a very stark contrast between sort of extravagant hedonism and the sort of very poor state of North Corel down below, where the people were truly suffering. So it's interesting to see, and you can imagine that a lot of the people from North Corel probably work in the Gold Saucer, and aren't able to enjoy it in the same way as the visitors.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to make, because even before the destruction of North Corel, it was a poor mining town. Barrett establishes that, and the whole context of it is this poor mining town. So it's not really the sort of people that would go and enjoy and frolic in the Gold Saucer, because we'd rightly assume that they probably couldn't afford to do that. So yeah, I think that's a great observation and a great sort of bit of clarity that they gave us by having the North Corel connection to the Gold Saucer be like a back entrance, a staff entrance. And what we also find slightly later, but still kind of talking about the environment and the setting, we have Corel Prison. Now, again, having a prison as part of a theme park didn't quite make sense, particularly as we remember as sort of this devastated town with houses pocketed around and bits like that, which again stays consistent to the source material. But I think it's Cait Sith gives us a bit of backstory as to that, which is that used to be the staff quarters. So back in the day, that was the staff quarters of the Gold Sorcerer as well. So all of these kind of seemingly disparate, weird things from the original that actually, to be honest, I didn't ever particularly question it. But yeah, they've given us a bit of clarity around that stuff, which was cool.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure, is the Dust Bowl, is it still a prison?
Or is it just like taken over by gangs, you mean?
Yeah, I think it's just more lawless sort of subculture, I suppose, under society.
Yeah.
Overtaken by Gus. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll get to Gus a bit later, I think, because there's another big character, both in the physical sense and the sort of inner character sense, in Dio, right?
Yeah, and we've spoken about this periodically through these episodes, and we're talking about how Final Fantasy VII straddles this line between kind of a sincere kind of dark story, like the whole Sephiroth angle and this sort of men in the black cloaks sort of thing, but then it leans heavily also into surrealism and kind of abstract weird stuff. So we arrive at the Gold Saucer, we have a weird musical montage including Yuffie, and it's almost like one of these step-up dance sequences that you'd see in like a Hollywood film, and then Dio arrives standing on the buggy kind of flexing his muscles and stuff, and it was pretty wild. And Dio, much like Sid Highwind, Bugenhagen, all of these characters that we met in the original game, I was interested to see how they would render him and bring him to life. I personally really enjoyed it, but I think you have to be willing to lean into the absurdity of Final Fantasy VII to sort of appreciate Dio's character a little bit. I
always wonder, like, if you're watching this with fresh eyes and you're playing this series for the first time through these games, how you take these things like Dio, who is so extreme and out there, but if you play the original, you remember Dio, and he was a muscular dude, but in this context, he looks so out of place.
But it's interesting with Dio, if I'm permitted to pull MJ Gallagher in here for a little bit, because one of the theories that he has is that the Gold Saucer is based on Yggdrasil, the world tree from Norse mythology. And in that sense, Dio might be Odin, and Dio is very similar to Dios, like meaning God. So he is the god of this world, which is in a way a bit silly, but at the same time, what's really interesting is the emphasis that Dio has on gold. He has a golden cape, and it's his gilded paradise, because Valhalla and Asgard in Norse mythology was a place filled with gold. So there's a sort of one more connection, and which is somewhat interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'd never made that connection myself, but that's the genius of MJ Gallagher, I suppose, because even if you look at the structure of the Gold Saucer, it's shaped like the life tree in a sort of weird way. So kind of having Dio in that role, because he is the theme park director, I think that's a great call.
Yeah, and feel like this new design feels more tree-like to me than the original. So when I first saw it, I was like, oh, MJ is going to have a field day with this one. Yeah.
You're challenged to a sort of mini game by him when you first enter, and you get. I thought it was really nice to see a modern rendering of the old graphics. Like you get the old Cloud again.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I know having done the Junon region already, you didn't play the Port Condor mission, but it was the same thing. They brought back these throwback graphics and stuff as a nod. Again, trying to look at this as a new fan with fresh eyes and stuff, it must have been quite real, because as soon as we've seen it as legacy players, we're like, oh, this is the old combat simulator, this is fantastic, you know. And they've shown us those old graphics of Cloud, which was cool. And
they finally did it justice, because in the original game, this beat 'em up was unbeatable.
Yeah,
like you couldn't win it. But now you can, and I finally did. I didn't manage to defeat Dio the first time around, but this time I did, and I'm so proud of myself, guys.
Good job.
Yeah, and then afterwards, whether you win or whether you lose, you get this gold ticket just for participating, which is different from the original, where you had to save up to buy it at 30,000 gil or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's different. And then one interesting thing about the fight, I think, is how it addresses Cloud's character. Because once the fight is over and Dio is sort of raising his hand into the air, he sort of gets into it. Yeah. Because Cloud is this sort of introvert in a way, who wants to be really cool. And then when he gets his moment in the spotlight, he sort of gets into it, just like it did in Junon when he was commanding the soldier unit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that, because he has this little smile and stuff as his hands raised, and like you sort of, again, it creates that empathy for him, and I think it's really warming to see bits of his character shine through. As we mentioned in the Junon segment, because it happens so sparingly, and they pace out those aspects of his character so well, I think it's really rewarding when we do see a bit more of Cloud's personality come through.
Mm-hmm. But then Cloud doesn't really feel his best in the Gold Saucer, and they sort of attribute it to it not being his scene, and then Barrett and Cloud get sent to the hotel to make a reservation while the others go and have fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we make it to the haunted hotel, and we see all of these fancy ghost mechanics, and Barrett doesn't like it, because this is not the way to use Mako. Not that he would think that any way of using Mako is justified, but this sort of extravagant hedonism just for the fun of it, using Mako, is especially insulting to him, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And is that when we meet Cait Sith for the first time?
We already see him in the dance scene, but this is the maybe first meeting, yes.
Yeah, the formal introduction.
And they confirm immediately that the Moogle is indeed a robot, because when I was a kid, that was something you wondered about until they...
Yeah. And yeah, I was interested to see how they would handle that, because I was never quite sure. I was like, it took me years to realize it was actually the cat that was like the main thing.
Yeah.
Because look at the concept art, and the Moogle is the most prominent aspect of that. But it's the cat, and it's Reed there. So
it's nice to see the big mascot thing make a comeback, because I remember back when they made Advanced Children, at least the story going around was that they didn't include it because it was too difficult to animate because of all the hairs or something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's just an urban myth or something, but at least it wasn't included in Advent Children, and not in Dirge of Cerberus either. So
yeah,
it's nice that it's here.
And jumping ahead slightly, just on the note of Cait Sith, I think how it was utilized in battle, how they decided to sort of give it those unique mechanics it had, where you can sort of bring it in and you sort of summon the Moogle to appear and then start using it in battle. I thought that was really cool, because I wasn't sure how they were going to handle it. And in general, I mean, each of these characters, I think they have really unique identities when you use them in battle. So I think I mentioned before, Yuffie's probably my favorite. But yeah, Cait Sith was cool. And it has a Scottish accent.
True.
Yeah.
Which is great. Were you guys party to the debates around the pronunciations and the origins of the Cait Sith? Because
Well, we of course make complete story videos, so we had to sort of think about how Peter was going to pronounce the name in the video.
yeah,
Because coming from like when we were kids, we read it as is, and it was Cait Sith. But then there's the traditional mythological pronunciation, which is more like Cat-She, I believe.
Catchy.
Something like that. And it's interesting that they went with Cait Sith. It's because it is a mythological name, and there's a way to pronounce it. But like apparently everyone just said it Cait Sith, so that's what they went with.
Yeah. Did you say Cait Sith when you recorded your videos?
Yeah, I would never say Cat-She.
Oh, you're lucky because mine's completely outdated. I've done research around the character, as you do, you look at the origins and etymology of names, and I was like, okay, it feels like it's going to be Catchy. And then years later, I realized I'm wrong.
It's the same with when we were kids, we called Red 13 Red X, so it called him Red X for 10 years because I was 8 and I couldn't read Roman numerals, so it was just Red X.
My most heinous error, again, because you play these games when you're like 10 years old or something, and you are kind of a moron when you're 10 and you're reading text on a screen, I always pronounce, and actually I'd be interested to know I don't know what versions you guys would have played, like whether they were the PAL versions or the...
Yeah, they're PAL versions. So
Barrett,
PAL. Yeah, Barrett said shit and fuck and everything.
Yeah. So in America, Aerith was always called Aerith, I think. But then in the UK version, the Europe version, I think she was called Aeris.
Yeah.
And I always pronounced Aries, like the zodiac sign. So like some of my earliest content is Aries, and most of the comments of that are like, "You are a moron. Why are you?"
We always, I mean, she was officially Aerith, like in our world for 15 years plus, because that's the way, that's the default name in the game.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. It wasn't until like Kingdom Hearts came out, I think, it was like, what the hell is this? Who the hell who's Aerith? And then you found out apparently it was a shitty translation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a damn shame. But the comment we most get about names is Final Fantasy IX, where we go Sedan instead of Sedane, because people think it's Sedane, which is incorrect, folks. It's Sedan. And we get that maybe, a couple of times a week still. People going, actually, you idiot, it's Sedane, because I decided when I was 10. And you go, and then you have to write the boilerplate comment and go, sigh. Like, they say it out loud on Dissidia. There's a wiki about it. Please educate yourself. Go and die. You get slowly more annoyed.
I feel your pain.
But speaking of dying, Cloud is dead tired, and he goes up to the room, right? And he goes to sleep, but he doesn't wake up as Cloud. He does wake up as Cloud, but not in his world. Or like, okay, so here's the thing. When we go into the Zack scene, we see it from Cloud's perspective, right? He is sitting in the chair, he can't really move, but he can sort of look around in a way. And I think this is sort of strange segue from the scene where Cloud is going to sleep, because it sort of implies that it is the same Cloud in a way. You are the one who goes to sleep, and then sort of you are privy to what is unfolding in this other world. Yeah.
Not only is it a weird segue in terms of, kind of going to bed as Cloud and waking up as Cloud, but in that scene, when you're playing a game, a character wakes up or whatever, and you're in a POV scene, you expect the controls as you move them to maybe move the perspective of that person, from their point of view. But actually in that scene, it moves Zack. So you're looking out of Cloud's eyes, but you're moving Zack. It's really freaky. And I didn't like it from a design perspective. It felt very jarring for me. So
it took me a while to get used to. So I was trying to move Cloud's perspective, and nothing happened.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's very deliberate, because it confused me too. I was like, it's not, the camera isn't moving, but Zack is moving. But I'm guessing this has to be a deliberate thing to sort of maybe illustrate their connection in some way.
Yeah. But this scene is pertinent in picking up on a sort of primary subplot, I suppose, to the main game, which is while we were in the Costa del Sol segment, Aerith was talking to Red 13 about how her holy materia had lost its color. It wasn't showing anything. And then actually one of the first things we see in that scene is we've got Zack moving about in the bedroom. We can see Aerith unconscious on another bed, and then we can see the holy materia next to her, which is still white, like retaining that pearl essence to it. So yeah, I think that's a strong hint that, you know, there's a dichotomy between these two realities. Different things are happening.
Yeah, definitely. And the sort of problem with analyzing something like that is that we still don't know, like the mystery is still unfolding, but it is a sort of, it keeps you on the bread trail.
Yeah.
It keeps you thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is emphasized yet again when we go downstairs. So Zack meets Elmira, which is kind of a weird, surreal scene, seeing these two kind of on screen together, and he meets Marlene, and then they start talking about their friend Biggs. So we know we're in this reality where Biggs is alive as well, where Biggs is still residing. So yeah, as you say, there's no conclusions or analysis to draw at this point, but just as a reprieve from Cloud's adventure in the Gold Saucer, and as a continuity of this subplot that's going on, it definitely continues to propel the mystery forwards and kind of have the player guessing, because yeah, it's very strange what's going on there.
Yeah, all I can say is I hope it's a good payoff, because it's I'm playing it fresh now and I still don't know what's going on, and there's a hope obviously that you know, Zack and the others will somehow meet up, but I don't see how that would happen. But yeah, I think they're doing this well. They're sort of breadcrumbing it throughout the game and keeping it up suspense wise.
One issue I sort of have with the Zack scenes, which really isn't a big issue, is that they feel, aside from feeling maybe a bit too small, I wish they were expanded on a little bit. They feel a bit cheap in a way, because you are everything you're seeing is sort of reused from remake, understandably. Like you are seeing the same places you saw from back then in a way, or maybe like yeah you are, but so it doesn't feel as sort of new as the rest of the game, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. For me, I think it was interesting to see Zack retreading this path we've already been down and stuff. I like that. And in fact, I'll touch on that in a moment. But I did feel that they were too small, and there wasn't enough progression. I would have liked to have seen a bit more progression in them, a bit more time in them, rather than like a 5-minute snapshot of something that's going on. Because I think you could still maintain a mystery, but show a bit more of what's going on. You know, spend a bit more time in Zack, give us a little bit more rather than these snapshots. And the point I was going to make was Final Fantasy VIII, which we referenced, I think, in the first episode. We were talking about these cuts between games and these cuts between characters. I think that Final Fantasy VIII's structure, the way they divided up the Laguna versus Squall segments, was fantastic. I think one of the reasons it's one of my favorite games is because of the structure and pace and story beats between those two arcs was really well done. But we spent a bit more time with Laguna and understanding him, what was going on around there, which lacks with Zack. But again, and we saw Laguna retreading these places that we'd been a Squall and vice versa. And I thought that was a good thing in that environment. So I didn't mind so much that Zack was back in Midgar. I just would have liked to have seen and understood a bit more about what was going on.
Yeah, and speaking of Laguna and the time we spent with Laguna just getting to know him, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a player who hasn't maybe played Crisis Core, isn't a legacy player, doesn't know Zack. Like, what will this player's impression of Zack be just from these very short scenes? Like, are they enough to really convey his character in a meaningful way? Or are they too short? And I'm sort of the opinion that they might be too short. I wish we had more. And speaking of Final Fantasy VIII, I would also love to see some sort of more back and forth between the sort of power or the play styles of these two different places in the story. I'm trying to explain what I'm talking about here, but like in Final Fantasy VIII, you have the main party, and then you have Laguna's party, and they sort of share a power in a way, and that is of course explained in the story. But at the same time, it might, and that might make it difficult to use in Rebirth. But it would maybe allow us to spend more time in Zack's world if I'm just trying to find a way to make that plausible in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you really do build this alternative life in Final Fantasy VIII with Laguna and Kiros and Ward, and you get to explore towns and talk to people, and then really sort of spend quite a lot of time, as you've said. And with Zack, everything you're going to do is a waste of time, so you're not going to be exploring and finding chests and talking and building up a character and leveling up or something. So you really just sort of want to plow through these things, and it makes it a lot more hollow than it felt with 8, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the song Hollow, no, I'm just kidding. Trying to make every segue very, very smooth. But no, so if we're done with Zack, we get back to Cloud waking up, and this is where I get absolutely furious. So I walk around the room in the gold saucer, and of course I see the Tomberry humidifier, who is adjusting the humidity levels in the room, and I get really jealous. So I'm already in a sort of state of mind where I'm ready to fight. And then I open the door, ready for my date with Tifa. I have been cultivating my relationship with Tifa throughout the entire game, playing it from scratch. And my wife is there with me, and I'm going to show her my woman of choice. And then nobody shows up. Like, I've been doing everything. I've been playing every side quest. I've been buttering them all up. Tifa is blue. And then nobody shows up, and I don't get a date with anybody.
And when you say Tifa is blue, you mean the little smiley face on top of her head?
Yeah, I'm not sad. She's happy.
No, yes,
I made her very happy.
Yes.
So who did you guys go on a date with?
So first playthrough was Tifa. When you do New Game Plus, as I'm doing now, you get a few options. You can actually choose who the date scene is, which is interesting. You can just go into the menu and change it. You can also cut out the Zack scenes if you wanted to. So it's interesting the array of things that you get to be able to do with New Game Plus. But yeah, I think Tifa was my first one, and then I think I've selected Barrett for my next one.
I got Aerith this time, but I'm having a hard time remembering how it was in the first game, because you go on this date and it gets cut a bit short. And was that the case also at this point in the game, in the original game?
They go on a date a bit later, the bigger date, right? No?
Because I remember the sort of gondola ride, and I thought that was going to happen now, but...
I think they do it later, because when you're searching for the key to the Temple of the Ancients, you go back to the gold saucer, and that's sort of on the eve of big things happening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then you have the bigger date, but I might be wrong, but I might be right as well.
No, you're probably right. And so you do go on this date, and you get to play some mini games and stuff, which is I quite enjoyed actually this time around.
Yeah, I was reminded of the previous episode. We were talking about Costa del Sol, the array of mini games there, and we were talking about how they might reuse these mechanics, and just for economy of design. But then there was so many more mechanics introduced in the Gold Saucer games as well. And again, I was playing so much of this game thinking, are these single-use mechanics? Are these single-use games? It was like wild to me. I really enjoyed it. I'm not complaining. I just want to say it was amazing to me. But the spaceship game in particular, which was based on, I can't remember what the original was called. It's like Gongaga, one of those old arcade style games where you're just shooting out of all the spaceships. I thought that was great. Really enjoyed that one.
I didn't really understand the sort of thematic importance of that game. I don't know what it sort of implies about the world or what it's referencing, or like it felt a bit out of place. But at the same time, when you are sort of a bit later, when you are doing Barrett's shooting thing from the back of the buggy, those mechanics felt a bit similar, even though the setting was a bit different.
Yeah.
But like, what is this space thing about? Like, if they're going to do space, it felt like they could have sort of linked that to maybe the Shinra space program or something like that. Because as it stands, we just have this space superhero, which I've never seen before.
Yeah, but that's fine if it's like a Disney World park where this is some IP in the world. This is Captain Buzzcock or whatever his name is, and you have to be a hero in this world. Like, not everything has to tie back to Shinra or something from the old games. Like, that's what sort of the prequels in Star Wars do. Like, everything has to be connected to something that happened in the original movies. So this is fine to me. It was just, this is Captain Buzzcock and his flying angels, and this is a little theme park around that.
Yeah.
It just felt like a little bit of a missed opportunity, because for some reason they were also trying to build up Palmer as a character, director of the space program at Shinra.
Yeah.
So it would be lovely to see some connection there in a way. But this sort of also ties into another thing I've been thinking about, is that for a game that has so much legacy, so much history, I don't feel like they're always making the most of the real estate that they have. So you're walking around towns and maybe there are some Easter eggs, but like, just like, for example, with paintings, a lot of the paintings don't have any real significance, while they could just litter the world with interesting things for players to find. And the space game, this fucking space game. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, but in terms of playing it, the space game was fine.
And then you get a real nice accessory, actually, if you get the first place. And, it's quite powerful. It's like you get like gold medal Star 1 ribbon thing, and it's like a bunch of stats. But then there's the motorcycle game, which is the same as the original.
G-Bike Challenge.
Yeah.
They've introduced Queen's Blood in the Wonder Square as well, the challenges.
Yeah, I didn't play that. So.
Could you play Queen's Blood there? Because I walked around, was like, I can't play anyone. And so
maybe it comes later. I didn't play it this time. I don't think I actually went to the Wonder Square. I accidentally advanced the story before I'd done all of the things. Yeah. Because I went to the Battle Square, I think it was. By the way, with the Battle Square, and I can't remember if we play it at this stage or if it's later, but since we're talking about the Gold Saucer, I'll talk about it. I was kind of hoping that, because I know there's a lot of debate around turn-based ATB Final Fantasy games, a lot of people want that retained and stuff, where they've done these throwback gestures to like Fort Condor with the Fort Condor game, the one-to-one beat 'em up that we do with Dio, for example. I thought that the Battle Square might be an opportunity to do like a traditional turn-based Final Fantasy, and I really had a strong feeling that they were going to go down that road, and they didn't, because the Battle Square was basically the same as the Colosseum from Remake that we do at Don Corneo's. It's basically a big arena where you fight loads of fiends. So yeah, I felt that was a missed trick, but I thought they were going to go turn-based.
That would have been good, actually. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Was there anything else going on at the Gold Saucer we want to talk about, or should we stay in the Battle Square and progress the story?
The reason your sort of date gets cut short, there's an emergency at the park, and I really should have sort of played the original before, but I remember it a bit differently. So there's an active shooter at the park, which is dark stuff, and in the original, you're sort of there is this question if it's actually Barrett or Dyne, and which is a really interesting moment. We were not quite sure, but here they immediately show you that it's not, and it is in fact Dyne who is shooting up the place. And I thought that was a really missed opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And that was such a good moment of the original game. I'm sorry, I've just remembered in this segment, I think I was actually with Red 13, because even though I've selected Barrett as my date, I think that comes later. Because Barrett, I don't think you can partner with him because of this aspect of the scene and the story. But yeah, so quite soon after we enter the Gold Saucer, Barrett sees someone walk past in a cloak, and we see the sort of gun alluded to there. And then I think Barrett arrives quite soon after. So they, as you say, they make it quite clear from the beginning that it's not Barrett. And yeah, I agree, that was a mistrick. And something I liked about the original was because Barrett is that temperamental, volatile sort of character. As we begin to understand his frustrations, like why he is the way he is, we're like, could he have done this? You know, there is that question, like, could he have done it? And they sort of robbed us of that.
But they also try to have their cake and eat it too, because they have these chats during when walking around the world in Corel Prison, when Tifa's going, "Oh, Barrett couldn't have done this," and they're just sort of discussing as if it's a possibility that he did, but we know that he didn't. They're trying to have this moment as well. So the party is discussing the possibility of Barrett shooting up the place. We saw immediately that it isn't him, instead of keeping us in suspense. And I remember it in the original game where it was quite stark because you were walking around, there was blood on the floor, and it's, again, quite spooky. And they sort of, again, in this instance, rob us of the spookiness. Same as on the cargo ship, well, the cruise ship. And they're really averse to having these sort of spooky, slow moments, which I thought were quite powerful in the original game, I think.
And it also sort of speaks to how they are maybe approaching the development of this game, being very aware of legacy players and the legacy of this game, and people knowing the plot twists, in that they are not willing to let this be a sort of mystery, because the answer is known. And that sort of makes you maybe wonder what's to come.
But you did sort of mention, Jack, about the sort of difference between the old game and its stylized graphics and this new version, which is, very high def. And it sort of made me feel a bit uneasy. And I think they handled it okay with the sort of active shooter at a park situation, which when it's rendered realistically in a way like this, it could have been really bleak and gone off the rails quite fast. And it sort of rides the line a bit. You don't walk around and there's blood everywhere and dead people. And because in this day and age, this is an actual issue. Yeah,
it's true. It's a very good point. And I think there's things around this character we're discussing, which is Dyne. We learn it's Dyne, who is someone that's kind of close to Barrett. They changed a lot of aspects of his story that I think I can understand why they did, which we'll come to in a moment.
And then they get sent down into the Dust Bowl. But it's sort of interesting the way Dio does it. In the original, he just, you did it. I'm not going to throw you down there. But now he has the wanted posters from Shinra. So he has maybe some reason to suspect them. But he also gives them the opportunity to clear their name, and they sort of go down there willingly on this mission to clear Barrett's name. And even if they didn't clear his name, Dio would still have every right to turn them in a way. But yeah, so we go down and we meet Gus. It was a bit interesting because he's very different from, this green clad character is very different from the one we know from the original Final Fantasy VII. And I was sort of reading up on it a little bit, and it seems like they were just going to cut this character out. I don't remember the name of the original character.
Mr. Coates.
Yeah, and then they sort of, because they were planning on maybe not including the Chocobo race, making his character unnecessary, and then they sort of needed another character, and then they gave him a green suit. So it's not not really the same character, which explains maybe why they are so very different.
It's interesting to hear that they were considering, of all the minigames to cut, the pivotal Chocobo race is one they considered cutting instead of the 30 other games that are already in the game. So I'm glad they didn't.
We must have the space game.
Yeah. No, it was interesting, and I mean, Mr. Coates, sorry, he's such a minor character in the original. I can understand how it wouldn't matter, but I think the concept of having like a king of like an underworld, I really kind of like that, who sort of like has this tenuous diplomatic relationship with people like Dio and the guys above and stuff. I kind of, as a concept, I thought that was really cool in the original, and how they sort of barter their ways out with racing and stuff like that. So yeah, I thought it was cool. I think they replaced Mr. Coates with Gus, which was neither here nor there for me. I didn't mind Gus, but what was interesting is where this could be interpreted and could have been created as one of these more dramatic sort of scenes. They could have made Gus a bit more of a villainous character. He was like disco dancing and like, and actually the music down in the Dust Bowl was very kind of disco-y sort of sounding, whereas throwback to the original. And the only reason I raise this is because it's I think it's one of the more understated pieces of music from the original game, but also one of my favorites, which is called the Sandy Badlands. And it's a very bleak sort of minimalist sound. And it creates this sense of isolation and dilemma, I suppose, when we're down there, that I think was very fitting for that moment where Barrett is going through this quite dramatic subplot for himself. So yeah, changing that up, I found atmospherically it was a bit strange. It was a departure from where we were with the OG game.
Yeah, it does sort of lessen the contrasts between the happy magical gold saucer and this surprise prison or dust bowl or slum we have beneath it, which if you haven't played the original, you probably wouldn't see that coming. It's there to begin with.
Yeah, and the Dust Bowl, it doesn't seem like that bad of a place. Like
Yeah.
we have some swindlers, but we also have people just freely playing Queen's Blood and enjoying life.
There's like a bar,
Yeah.
the band playing. It's like, I could live here.
Yeah.
And you don't really get the sense, because if you play the original again, on the world map you see the gold saucer is surrounded by a big desert which you can't really cross, and so you don't get the sense maybe in this game that you are trapped there and you can't actually just walk out, because there's a huge, expansive, dangerous desert right outside, which is sort of really, you see it really clearly in the original.
Yeah, I think this is one of the few instances, and again, I'm jumping a bit ahead, but it's very much to do with that setting. One of the few instances where I felt the shrunken down world did not work in the favor of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was the fact that they've reduced that, and actually the surrounding region, this sort of Dust Bowl region, was really compacted down. It was quite easy to traverse, like we had the buggy. So that entire sense of I'm in the middle of nowhere, and if I try and leave, I'm going to die immediately. Like that was completely gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the only thing that's really holding them there is them trying to clear Barrett's name and the threat of Dio sort of turning them in to Shinra.
Yeah.
And you're tasked by Gus to win a chocobo race, but in order to do that, you need to feed Pico, your chocobo, and then we meet Chocobo Billy, right? The little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the girl's name in the
Esther?
Yeah, yeah. And you get this little mini game about you have to run around the prison area, but it's not a prison, is it? I'm not sure anymore. But you got to run around, and you can earn. They're not Gishel greens; they're Selkis greens this time. So whatever. But and one of the ways to do that is to play Queen's Blood, which I didn't do. But you can get all three that you need without playing Queen's Blood this time, which made me happy.
So happy. But yeah, one interesting thing I felt about Gus, of course, as well, and this feeds into maybe the bigger thing of Dyne, is that Gus is not afraid of Dyne. Like, Gus has already tied Dyne up, and the price of sort of doing his bidding is just getting to know his location.
Yeah. So again, let's come on to Dyne's character now, because this was some of the changes with Dyne I completely understood, and some of them I don't, and it goes back to this change for the sake of change that didn't add value, and actually was quite detrimental. So Dyne, this entire Dyne segment was one of my favorite aspects of the original game, and I think in any Final Fantasy it's probably one of the darkest sort of character arcs that we have. I mean, it's really quite a bleak scenario, and again, it really opened up and allowed us to understand and appreciate who Barrett was, where he's from, and these regrets and guilt that he carries around with him. So it was a very powerful scenario, and Dyne is a very tragic character. So just to compare with the original, Dyne is this elusive guy that is kind of like a psychopath who's off kind of on his own, and nobody really wants to go near him by the sounds of it, and we have to seek him out ourselves, so Barrett can have this confrontation with him. As you say, Gus saying that they've already apprehended him and tied him up, I think in a roundabout way diminishes the sense of Dyne as this loose cannon, this kind of wayward guy that's really kind of scary and whatever, and no one wants to go near because he's been captured by a bunch of low-life thugs and tied up. So that felt detrimental to his character for me.
Yeah, like, I really liked in the original game how Dyne was sort of this loose cannon, oppressive tyrant of Corel Prison, or whatever it was called, where people really truly feared him. Yeah. So that's something that isn't a part of his character anymore.
Because I think even Mr. Coates, who was the original equivalent of Gus, who was like the head of the underworld, I think he said something like, I can't believe, because we take the locket of Marlene from Dyne's corpse, and he says, I can't believe you guys killed Dyne, and that shows the difference. Whereas Gus is happy to go and apprehend him. The original king of the underworld, Coates, was just like, I can't believe you did that, because even he wouldn't go near him, sort of thing. So, yeah, it was cool. But yeah, so if we skip forward to when we actually confront Dyne, he's tied up in a warehouse. These guys have apprehended him, and he's tied up, and he's basically hallucinating and talking to the ghosts of his dead wife and kid and stuff, and he's kind of in this completely deranged state, demoralized state. I don't know about you guys, because it's interesting how you interpret the original text, but I never got the impression he was actually like literally kind of insane, like in a hallucinatory sort of way. I thought he was sort of catatonic and kind of psychopathic, but I didn't think he was like delusional and things like that.
Yeah,
the same. He just felt very angry at the world, nihilistic, just sort of over all of it. But maybe if you'd be left in a hot room, tied to a chair for a prolonged period of time, maybe you would start to hallucinate.
I thought they were going to take it a bit further, because there's a point in the boss fight, or after the boss fight, which we can talk about, where soldiers show up and start shooting. I thought first, oh, these are illusions, and he's fighting his past, and I thought they were going to take it quite far. But then Cloud starts chopping them to bits as well, so they're actually there.
But it's really interesting also before the fight, when sort of Barrett is sort of rescuing Dyne, and they sort of reunited. It's the sight of Cloud that triggers Dyne, because he sees Barrett with this soldier-dressed dude, and he's like, you're still working with Shinra, you're still taking Shinra's money, and then they sort of get into it and start to fight.
So, hey, So this is my second playthrough, and I made the heinous error of kind of diminishing all of these dramatic emotive moments that happen in these chapters because everyone is still wearing their swimwear from Costa del Sol. So it's like a half-naked Cloud shows up and Dyne goes crazy, and it looks like actually a lover's tiff between him and Barrett. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, you're right, and I think just going back to the differences in Dyne's character and how they've decided to write him, I think what they've tried to do is move away from the fact that, he kind of, in the original game, he kills himself. He commits suicide. To this day, I struggle to think of games where characters do commit suicide, particularly in such a dramatic way as he does there. And it's sort of that sort of catatonic depression and having given up and stuff. And it was a very powerful kind of sad moment. I had a strong feeling going into this game that they weren't going to replicate that. I think it's quite a taboo subject.
This is just a guess, but this is just a guess, but I'm wondering if it has something to do with the changes in the game rating, age rating between the years, and if they would in 2024 now depict suicide, that would not gel well with the ESRB rating system, which was in a different state or very newly formed after Mortal Kombat in the 90s. So this is just an out there guess that maybe they could not depict suicide without getting a higher age rating for the game.
It's entirely possible. But yeah, so what they kind of replaced it with was this sort of suicide by cop thing where Dyne starts just doing a last stand against all these Shinra troops.
And also it's an heroic stance because he is saving Barrett. Like he gets between the soldiers and Barrett. But okay, so I can sympathize with Square Enix maybe not being willing to depict suicide in the game. But why do they have to give Dyne the sort of mechanical Akira-looking arm?
He went full Akira. That was really surprising.
And it's so strange because when that happens, Barrett goes like, "Oh, Dyne, what have you done to yourself?" I don't know what he's done to himself. What did he do to himself in the world to do that? Seems a bit crazy and unnecessary in a way.
Yeah. I saw a lot of backlash against the whole Akira metal arm thing, Tetsuo metal arm. I actually, as a boss fight in a vacuum, I actually liked it. I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it completely came out of left field and it was just out of the blue and strange.
I mean, conceptually, it is a bit interesting or weird to, like, you have a fight between two people and they both have guns and they're just standing opposed to each other and shooting each other with guns and everyone is fine. So, like, I guess they had to sort of change it up a little bit so it's not just bullets.
And then in the cutscene afterwards, he gets killed by bullets.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the term for that in game studies again? What sort of happens in a game and what happens in a cutscene?
What is it again? Ludonarrative dissonance or something like that.
Yeah.
So the dissonance between what is being played and what is being experienced as the story. But yeah, so if we're done with Dyne, we get another amazing boss fight.
Immediately,
because we haven't had enough boss fights in a while. So we get this amazing boss fight with Palmer in his like mecha frog thing.
Yeah.
Which it felt a bit too much. I'll be honest. I didn't need another boss fight at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, I think not only is it that boss fight, but it's immediately followed by the chase scene as well.
Yep.
I can remember the second playthrough. I sort of was used to it. I remember the first playthrough. I was actually getting anxiety. It was just like the pace of everything being thrown at me at once. So I was just like, man. I think as soon as the chase finished, I just saved the game and had to go outside. I was just like, that was a lot of boss fights in a row, you know.
And then they have the chase scene, which is 4 times as long as it has to be.
Yeah.
So you do this sort of shooting minigame from the back of the truck, and that's a good 8 minutes of just shooting motorcycles and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of keep trying to push Palmer at this stage, which they started doing it a bit in the Gold Saucer. So you take his hotel room, where Cait Sith sort of debooks his rooms and gives them to you, and then you can see him again with some hostess girls and watching the race, and you're being reminded of who this guy is, because apparently you have to fight him, which we do now. And I didn't come out of this with a newfound respect or admiration or for Palmer in any way. So it was a bit lost on me, this whole thing. But he is a part of the old game, obviously. But this is all new, right? Like you don't fight Palmer until Rocket Town in the original game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is maybe just to ease people into it, because everybody was so excited about Rocket Town just because they wanted to fight Palmer. No, so Palmer, he feels unnecessary in this part of the game. But one interesting thing about him sort of hanging out with the girls, which in its own way feels very Japanese, like a host club or something like that. But he's also eating something very Japanese, a parfait, which is a sort of cultural institution in Japan, this particular type of parfait. So was very interesting to see. If you remember the sandwich from first chapter. So yeah, just like back in episode 1, what was the line?
We discussed the sandwich. More food for thought for something. I don't know.
You were mentioning your essay.
Yeah. So yeah, just like we mentioned in episode 1 regarding the sandwich. So that's just more food for thought for my academic article.
That's a bit. You should do that again. The timing was a bit shitty on that. You go. Okay.
Leave a dramatic pause.
Yeah, a little bit of dramatic pause. Yeah, exactly. We discussed the sandwich. Period. So this is just more food for thought.
Okay. Yeah, so just like we discussed in chapter 1 with the sandwich, this is just more food for thought for my academic article on Japanese-ness in this game.
Nailed it. Okay. Fuck. What do you want to... So
yeah, they're fighting, and then once the chase scene is over, they are rescued by Dio, who gives them the buggy and reveals that the bracelet, the golden ticket, is indeed a listening device, so he could track their movements or at least listen in on them to ascertain their innocence.
Exactly.
Which is the same as in the original, right?
No,
not the same, but I remember him having a listening. He could listen to them somehow, right?
Oh, really?
I thought. Well, now I'm not sure anymore, but yeah, it felt very familiar that he had a way of listening in. Not that matters. That's fine.
He does give us the buggy.
He does give us the buggy.
Yeah.
One thing I will say interesting before we move on about this chase scene and all that Palmer stuff is we saw the sort of side of the Turks where they go like they know this is ridiculous what Palmer's doing, but Rude says like, "What are you gonna do?" Like he's basically saying he's an executive and he does what he wants, and we're beholden to their orders. But it was good, interesting to see the sort of dissent and Elena vocally saying that because she's still quite fresh. She's a new Turk, so she still says these things out loud.
Yeah,
and Rude just going, "These are higher ups and they do what they want."
Yeah. I think the way they've built out the Turks across all of these games, like they're really good. And again, they're just continuing to build up Elena subtly. We've been introduced to her like maybe once or twice by this point, so we're kind of getting a real impression of her relationship and role in this hierarchy of those guys.
Yeah, and after his phone call with Elena, Rude goes like, "Oh, I miss you, partner," because he misses Reno or Reno, I imagine. But one other interesting thing about Root is that when he sort of faces off with Dio, they do it in a very manly way, just full frontal, like grappling contest. And it's sort of interesting because Dio is, of course, this very big guy, but he seems to be sort of overpowered by Root. And he was also overpowered by Cloud just a little bit earlier. When they do the handshake, and Dio goes like, oh, just signaling how strong Cloud really is.
Yeah.
This is obviously a comment on bodybuilders and the use of functional strength versus aesthetic strength. And
I was gonna go down that road, and then I just didn't want to seem like a douche. So thank you, but I was gonna say the same thing.
But Dio is still a nice guy. He just has body dysmorphia.
Yeah, evidently.
Yeah. And then the chapter concludes with a scene in the Shinra building where Rufus and Zhang are discussing priorities, whether they should focus all their efforts on this new Magnus materia, or whether they should also be looking into recapturing Aerith.
Mm-hmm.
And Rufus says that they should not forget about Aerith because seeing the Promised Land is a dream of his.
Yeah.
So something that he wants to realize. Yeah, and then they're joined by Lodbrok, who sort of appears. And like we discussed in the last episode, or the June episode, I am more and more convinced that Lodbrok is one of the sort of emissaries of Genova, taking on the form of someone who has already passed away. How do you feel about that?
I think this is the first scene. I can't remember in the earlier scene if we see all the swirling little mist stuff around Lodbrok or not. But it was certainly this scene where I started thinking, I was like, this has got something to do with Genova or Sephiroth or something like that. It was a very mysterious, ominous sort of interaction between him and Rufus here. Peter, is it first playthrough? What were your impressions of the...
Yeah, I mean, it's a mysterious guy, but I mean, they've focused on stuff like Cloud's hair with the chocobo chick that you save, and it's in your mind quite fresh.
Yes.
And Glenn has this very similar and looking hair, so I can't help but believe that's very deliberate. They've brought so much focus to it. So as a fresh player, this is all very reminiscent of Cloud and
yeah, I think obviously we discussed it last time, but I think in the last scene, because we discussed it previously, I was very consciously thinking about that while I was watching this scene. And it might also be the first scene where we see Lodbrok's hood down, because I noticed the hair thing as well, and it might be because we can actually see his full head. But yeah, so now I'm really starting to lean into this fan theory, whether there is something between himself and Cloud. I'm not sure.
It's just like such a stupid name, though. I'm sorry. Glenn Lodbrok is the worst name I have. So it'll take some getting used to if this is the case.
Yeah. At the very least, regardless of whether he is Cloud's father or not, they are making us think that there is a connection.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like they made this character and they're like, oopsie, he's so similar to Cloud that people are drawing connections. No, this is very deliberate for one reason or another. But yeah, should we move on to chapter 9?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that open with a Zack thing again?
Yes.
Right.
Or maybe... I don't know whether the last chapter concludes with Zack, or whether Zack is the beginning of chapter 9. But that's the sort of...
But you have this sort of moment where you promised Marlene that you're going to go find Biggs, right? And he's the sole survivor of the gang in this reality, and then you just sort of very straightforwardly you go and do that, and then the scene is sort of over, right?
Yeah, and while you're doing that, it seems like in this dying world that Avalanche is still active. Because
there's an explosion, right?
There's an explosion and people attribute it to Avalanche. And then you run and you see Biggs, and he has new clothes for some reason. People don't usually change clothes in these games. So is there a significance to that?
Yeah, that's a good
Is
point.
it because it's a different world, or is it because, like, when your friends die, do you change your clothes?
You get a haircut and you change your clothes, and yeah.
A new me. Yeah. But yeah, so another sort of fairly short Zack scene. And like you mentioned earlier, these scenes can be skipped. So they're not really thought of as completely integral to the linear experience of playing this game. Which is a bit of a shame, I feel, because, well, they marketed Zack as being this big thing. And one of the sort of bigger reveals in Remake is this twist of having Zack being alive. And then at this point in the game, you feel like they're not doing enough with him to justify that.
Yeah, I wish I could have, as we mentioned earlier, like some connection to the stats you have generally in the game, and you could build this alternative life just like 8. So if these parts were sort of expanded upon, you could grind a little bit and fight and build up this sort of alternative life, and you're just not doing that here. So I blast through these as fast as I can because I know they're just not a waste of time, but I'm not gonna gain anything from this materially.
Yeah, and that's a real shame because Peter, as your first playthrough, you're at this point in this game for the first time, and you're feeling that way. And yet, if we go back to the first episode, I remember you saying, Zack's the first person that we control and play as in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and you were saying that you were quite excited by that, and you were like, "Where's this going to go?"
Yeah.
And then, as you can see, by this point in the game, it's sort of petering out, and you're like, "What's happening?" You know? So, yeah, it was unfortunate.
And yeah, I didn't know you could skip them, as you said. Like, that's kind of shocking, actually. Like, so why are we doing this? if you could just have little cutscenes, and that'd be maybe some nice choreographed cutscenes with nice angles, and maybe that'd be more valuable than having us run around a sort of diminished Sector 7 or something. Anyways.
Yeah. And then we're riding in the buggy in the desert, and Yuffie gets car sick. Ha 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 ha.
I'm sorry. Don't be so
It's hilarious. No, I thought it was great. And in the chase scene, even, I think you get this one frame of Yuffie being car sick, sort of go as they jump up and down. I think it was really good because they need to use as much of the game's real estate to establish the characters and to build on who they are and how we know them. And I thought it was great because I don't feel like they always do that. For example, one of the quests in this area is related to finding the cloud-like bird. And instead of sort of making, to be completely fair, that quest does tell us something about Barrett's character, but big part of it is just this Easter egg of having a black man with a bird in his hair as a reference to Final Fantasy 13.
Yeah.
But to be fair, at the end of that quest, the children are sort of thanking Cloud and Barrett, and then one of the kids comes and he's like, sorry, our parents told us that we can't talk to you. So it's a sort of the stigma that Barrett has in Corel sort of gets extended to the children, even though they don't completely understand it. So that was a bad example. But a lot of the side quests, but a lot of the side quests don't seem to make full use of what they are to tell us something meaningful about the characters or the world. Like, And that's why I liked the scene with Yuffie in the buggy where she is Karsic.
Character development.
Character development.
Yeah, we have a ninja that's Karsic, which is hilarious. She's doing somersaults and flips, but she can't fly planes or drive cars because she pukes.
Yeah. But just to get sidetracked a little bit, and speaking of characters in the world, I still want to meet, the character I most want to meet is Chocobo Sam. Because they've sort of alluded to some sort of mystery connected to him, with Chocobo Billy sort of resenting him for the death of his parents. And then we meet Chocobo Billy again. And we haven't met Chocobo Sam, but we have met Andrea 2 times already, or 3 times even. Well, at the cruise ship and then in the Gold Saucer, and even in Costa del Sol. So we keep meeting him, even though he's supposed to be this very important man. He just goes very casually walking around and losing a dance competition to Yuffie, shamefully. That's his job.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's I don't remember where I was coming from or where I'm going with this.
So we're heading to Gongaga. Fuck.
Yeah, and one interesting thing about this area is that this part of the game, well, this is the part of the game where you sort of can't finish everything. Because, for example, there was the Costa del Sol area, and you couldn't finish Johnny's quest until you reached this area, because you need to defeat the Thornberry King there. This is sort of one of the marked hunts or something like that, and you need to steal his crown. But then you also meet Gilgamesh and the Proto-Relic, and you can't actually finish the Proto-Relic quest during this part of the game. You finished like a part of it, and then the rest is saved for later. So I'm excited. Did you do that?
I did the Proto-Relic, yeah.
Yeah. So the one maybe interesting thing about that is how they are incorporating cactuars in a way that they weren't important in the original Final Fantasy VII. So sort of building on the legacy of Final Fantasy as a franchise in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those commonalities, isn't it? You've got Tomberries, Chocobos, Moogles, Cactuars. They are like the nucleus of these sort of tenuously linked worlds that make up the Final Fantasy anthology. So I think kind of seeing them in any capacity is sort of, yeah, it's a strong nod to the franchise rather than any specific given game, you know.
Yeah. And then we also have a very weak nod to the franchise with Kid G, who is like a goblin boxer, which I think is most notably a reference to Final Fantasy IX. Maybe it dates back longer, I don't know.
Yeah.
But like he has a very big nose and very big ears, and it feels very out of place. When he walks into frame, it feels like a PlayStation 1 character is walking into frame. It was very strange. Can you relate, Peter?
Oh, I didn't play any of that stuff.
But yeah, in general, like the Cactuar, it's Cactuar Crush, right? This.
Yeah. I think it's.
Yeah, it's where we have to run around and just kill loads of Cactuars in a time frame.
Yeah.
This quest, and I just found it very laborious.
Yeah, like when I encountered the first reactor where you do that, I thought, oh, interesting. This Proto-Relic is just this one dungeon or something. But no, there's more. And the second time around, for the first time around, you do it with Yuffie, who is sort of spry and fast, and it's sort of, you can have fun with it at least.
Yeah, the Yuffie one was fine. I think you have to do it with Aerith. I was just like, no, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's a lot slower, and it doesn't feel as fun to the extent that this can be fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but it was sort of funny to see Cloud and Yuffie take on the Cactuar pose. Yeah. That was good.
Thank you.
But should we move on to Gongaga then?
Yeah, let's do that swiftly. I say swiftly. Gongaga. I liked Gongaga, but there was a lot of backlash against it. I think we kind of, before we started kind of recording the episode, we've sort of touched on it a little bit. I'd be interested to know how you guys felt. I recently did an episode talking about the various locations in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, like each of the locations and how they kind of departed aesthetically or whatever from the original. Gongaga was originally kind of like 2 or 3 pre-rendered backgrounds. That was it. It was kind of a tiny location in Final Fantasy VII proper. And here they've turned it into this sprawling complex of jungle. So for my part, I found it interesting that they opted to do that in this particular point in the story where you're trying to sort of maintain some momentum, or I was anyway. I was trying to like see what happened next, whatever. But also because it felt like the mechanics were that of a dungeon rather than an overworld. And I feel like an overworld is something that you want to traverse. You should be able to intuitively and relatively simply traverse if you want to. And there's opportunity for side quests and good dungeons to go into from there. But the overworld as itself is just a means of getting from A to B. But they took that and they turned it into basically, they gave it lots of sort of dynamics that were basically dungeon puzzling aspects. So I found it quite jarring and strange.
Yeah, I think they really, if they wanted to nail the fact that this is a jungle and you can get lost and it's quite dense and multi-pathed, I think if that was the intent, then they did that quite well. But it is a big departure from what we're used to when it comes to like overworld traversal. I mean, I got lost quite a lot, shamefully so. I couldn't find the way to the reactor, for example, for a while because I just swam in the wrong direction and stuff, and I went around and around and around, and yeah. So if the intent was to make it a confusing jungle, then job well done.
Yeah. So I didn't really mind the jungle. I just swam in the river until I reached the town. But what bothered me more than the jungle was the village of Gongaga itself, which seems like heaven on earth. It seems like paradise. It seems like this oasis in an otherwise dystopian world. Well, I say that, but the world doesn't really feel that dystopian. But this village in particular feels like a very nice place, whereas in the original it was more like North Corel. Like the reactor had exploded and people were still sort of dealing with the tragedy of that.
And the young men had left to make a name of themselves, and it was like a dying small town. Yeah, you're right. But but you get this lush tropical paradise now with hot ladies and muscular men.
Yeah.
Nice houses.
It was strange. And I think it really makes me, I mean, I don't know, I never really dwelt on it much until I really started kind of getting into Final Fantasy VII proper and realizing that, for example, these core events regarding Cloud and Zack and stuff, that was like 5 years ago. It was like 5 years prior to the thing. So it always kind of throws me when they talk about when these events occur. Like the reactor blew up like 3 years ago, I think Sith says, and I'm like, 3 years ago? Okay. Because a lot of this stuff feels like it's like age old and it's just been decaying for years, if decades. And
on that note, there's like Cait Sith has a line where he says, like, Sephiroth, he's been dead for half a decade, like half a century or something. He says like 50 years or something.
No. I think that's you misremembering.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think it's 5 years. Yeah. I think it's 5 years. Yeah.
Because I heard 50 years, and I was like, wait, and I got really confused. Anyways, cut that out.
But coming into the village, one thing I really liked, and I think, I think it was really good, and I'm surprised that they haven't done it more as yet. So, for example, and what I'm talking about is the throwback, the nods to other installments in the franchise, in the Final Fantasy VII compilation. And the last one I remember us discussing is episode 1. Not to be mentioned, there was like a Benora White's poster for these apples that we see in Crisis Core. Now, jumping forward to like halfway through the game, we actually see Cissnei, who is a character in Crisis Core. So I thought that was really cool. Not only that, but they actually fade in I think it's called The Price of Freedom, but it's one of the core theme tunes of Zack in Crisis Core as well. So that starts playing when we meet her, and I was just like, nice. That was nice. Again, as I've mentioned, everyone in my party is still wearing swimwear. So it was quite weird to see Cisne say, I think I know you, and Howard is like just wearing swimming trunks and nothing else. But yeah, so that was quite weird. But the point being there is that she sort of can see glimpses of Zack in him or his attire or something like that, and vice versa. Sorry, not vice versa, but yeah. Thoughts, you guys?
Also, like Cloud, as you enter the Gongaga forest, he notes that he feels like he's been there before. So the sort of barriers between Cloud and Zack start to break down a little bit more. And having Cisne there is a sort of nice way to take that even further, I feel. But then, speaking of not taking it far enough, I feel like we don't get to know Cisne enough. Like, and even when you do the side quests, they don't focus enough on Cisne. I feel like they did a good enough job in the Grasslands with Broden. They established this sort of interesting character in a way, and then they sort of reveal something about him as you do the side quests. But with Cisne, you don't really get that much, I feel. Instead, you get a very annoying side quest about you catching a chicken. And the chicken then gets cooked, leading to a sort of existential crisis for Red 13, who has just saved this chicken. Like, and all of this comes at the price of freedom. No, I mean the price of Cisne.
Yeah, I got the two mixed in my head, Gongaga and the Bonora. Like Angeal's hometown and Gongaga. I got confused in my head, and I was expecting some Angeel stuff the whole time, which makes no sense. And it's just a failure on my part. And I thought the monument was the monument to Angeel at first, but I was just it was just way off. But I do hope we will eventually get some Angeel stuff, especially if you play Crisis Core. I think it'll be pretty rewarding if we.
Yeah, we of course do get some Zack stuff because we go and visit Zack's parents with Aerith, and they sort of ask Cloud whether he knows Zack, and he says he doesn't, but he gets this Genova sort of glitch flash. But one interesting thing about that, I felt, was once that conversation is over and they go and meet Tifa, the girls say something like, that sells it, he doesn't know Zack, because they seem to have a sort of interesting side dialogue going on when we can't hear. They are talking between themselves about boys.
But it would also make no sense for one soldier first class to not know all of them, because there's maybe 3 or 4 active duty first soldiers at a time in the whole of the Shinra sort of army. So it doesn't really make any sense that Cloud doesn't know who Zack is if Cloud is who he is. I think.
Yeah, definitely. There are some things that don't add up with Cloud's story. You're right. We should suspect Cloud. But yeah, exactly.
Did you want to comment on the mushrooms? Because I know food is your forte in these games.
Gongaga mushrooms. Japan is known for these regional dishes, and the Gongaga mushrooms.
Yeah, did you guess the correct mushroom when Red 13 prompts you?
No. He said you have a death wish. Interesting.
Yeah. I did, because on the new game plus, it kind of shows you the correct answer.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Really?
Cheap.
Interesting.
Yeah. I did not need that. I'm a mushroom expert because I've lived in Japan. No, I'm kidding. But yeah,
We're losing steam. So somebody please take the reins and talk about the reactor making a noise, and then we go check it out. Right?
sounds like you can do it.
Okay. So we have this moment with Cisne where we sort of go up to the hill, and there's a monument there that Shinra erected, surprisingly, to commemorate or remember this tragedy that happened when the reactor exploded. And after that, we retire to our room as Cloud and wake up to a howling from the reactor. And Barrett says, volunteers the boys to go check it out.
And he also sort of says that Yuffie can't be a part of it, which I thought was an interesting dynamic, because it's just because he's too young. So Barrett is still sort of being protective of her in a way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was more like you're going to steal something, you dirty thief, but I like your interpretation better.
But there's also an element of that because he doesn't quite trust her as well, but he does recognize that she is young. We already established that back in Under Junon, where he says that he won't take her into Avalanche because she's just too young. And then we go to the reactor, and the first time around we have to do it on foot.
Yes.
Yeah.
I got lost. I just got really lost. I had to Google it. I somehow missed the little shimmy entrance and spent half an hour running around.
But one thing that sort of really bothered me about that wasn't the jungle itself, but it's that once you make your way through the jungle, you then have to make your way through the reactor as well. Like it's sort of, they stretch it out a little bit too much, I feel. Yeah, but
no, I get you. I think I didn't appreciate that as much on my second playthrough because, again, with New Game Plus, I could just fast travel to the reactor. So actually, I was really permitted to enjoy that reactor dungeon for what it was, and I quite liked it. I think, as we've seen throughout this game, like they've been a bit hit and miss with some of the puzzles, some of the obstacles, some of the dungeons, and I actually kind of like this one. I thought it was neat.
What I am hearing is that Alleyway Jack is going on record as someone who loves the inclusion of the whispers.
That is not what I just said. That is not what I just said.
But there are whispers in the dungeon, right?
There are whispers in the dungeon. They are different whispers.
Yeah, they're sort of white, right?
Yeah, and we forgot to mention, but interestingly, Cisne is one of the people who can see them, and Red 13 actually mentions that. He says, like, only we should be able to see, like, what is happening. And we don't really get an answer to it, but it's an interesting sort of marker that she is quite important. And then we get the reactor, and there are these whispers, and they are white. And on a technical level, I hated how they look, because they're unlit vertex animations with vertex colors, and you can see just how they're really ugly. And I get why they did that, because they're trying to make it really clear that there are black and white whispers. But just throw that out there, like, I hated how they look.
Yeah. And so, yes, you get through this dungeon with the guys, and then you have a boss fight where you fight one of Hojo's creations, which is dropped down on you by Scarlet. And then you have this little playing around with time, where you go back to the girls, and they sort of make their way really fast on Chocobo, using the mushrooms to sort of bounce around the forest and get there really fast, and then the grappling hook. And then you have another boss fight.
You do, with Scarlet, right?
With Scarlet in her mecha armor. And sometimes I wish I could just enjoy the story. I feel like I've paid my dues. I feel like I've beaten one boss. I feel like I've done one dungeon. But it seems like they're trying to convince me that fighting and playing the game is actually should be rewarding in and of itself.
I wonder how much of this has to do with playing this last minute in preparation for this episode. So you're sort of like, come on. Like, Gongaga is really long, and then there's another boss fight. Damn it, I have to go to bed. So
yeah, there is definitely an element of that. So it's very interesting the way you play games, how it can affect you. And we're playing this chapter by chapter. So if a chapter drags on, we can be very sort of aware of it, I think.
But so there's a boss fight and Scarlet's there and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And now we come to a very different part in this game compared to the original, where Cloud is sort of losing his marbles a bit and ends up attacking Tifa, even after she is supposedly shown him that she is real and she has a scar. We don't get to see the scar, so we can't be 100%. But he throws her in the Mako pool. And please tell us what happened, Jack.
Yeah, so you've kind of nailed it there. Once again, Cloud sees a whisper sort of transition into an image of Sephiroth, who, as he has periodically been doing throughout this game, has been appearing and sort of questioning the authenticity of Tifa in saying who she says she is and having been attacked by Sephiroth in the past. So again, this kind of flips on its head what happened in the original game, where it was more people questioning Cloud's authenticity. But Sephiroth seems to be in Cloud's head now, and it's the other way around. He attacks Tifa, as you say, she falls into the Mako pool, and we come to a very interesting sort of complete departure from what happened in the original and what we may have expected. I think a weapon comes out and swallows her whole, right, and then takes her down to the depths.
But it's not just a complete departure, because it's also a rearranging of events.
Yes.
Because
yeah. And this is it. So once we go down into the depths of the Mako inside this weapon, or we come to this rearrangement, as you say, of what happened with the original. So in the original game, Cloud falls into a coma at Mideel with Mako poisoning, which they sort of hint at here, actually. I don't know if you noticed, he was like coughing and stuff when these Mako monsters appeared. And so I was interested. I wasn't quite sure. And I only noticed it on the second playthrough. I was like, so we're seeing this image of Sephiroth because of the whispers, but how much of it is Mako? Because they seem to have made a thing out of Cloud being affected by that, which may have affected how we sort of approach Tifa that way. But yeah, in the original, Cloud goes into his own mind and Tifa has to salvage him from it, going through these individual scenarios of past events, particularly when they were together at Nibelheim. And again, this is what happens, but it's actually Tifa who is undergoing these events herself, and it's looking at her past. So yeah, they've taken these original story beats and story elements from the original game, and they've just repackaged them and offered them to Tifa, which I thought was quite interesting.
And what Tifa sort of realizes is that Cloud saved her on Mount Nibel when she was going to meet her, when she was trying to meet her mother's spirit, her mother having just passed away. Because she lost her memory, and there were different stories about what happened, and Cloud didn't really look well. He wasn't always the hero of that story.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I've been mulling this over, actually. Like, why are these changes taking place, and why is Sephiroth so much more focused on Cloud, and in particular Tifa, Cloud's relationship to Tifa? And I think if we think, and again, this is theory, but it's trying to piece it together. It's like in the original game, we had several instances where Tifa was actually saving Cloud. You know, she's this very strong sort of maternal person that's always looking out for Cloud. The Mideel segment that we've just touched on, that is Tifa going out of her way to sort of salvage Cloud and that sort of thing. So for me, particularly in this moment where Sephiroth makes Cloud pretty much attack Tifa, he's the one that prompts that entire thing to take place. I'm like, is he trying to separate these two? Because he knows that Tifa is one of the only people that can save Cloud from himself. She has all this knowledge of their past together. She is his one link to the past, because everyone else from Nibelheim is dead, you know. So because when I first saw this on my first playthrough, I was just like, this is strange, and I don't know where this is going, and I found it weird. On my second playthrough, thinking about it more narratively, and I'm actually like, oh, okay, I'm sort of on board with it. I can see, looking at this as a sequel as it is, and we should all know by now it is a continuity of the original game, not a retelling of it or replacement of it. I'm like, okay, I can sort of see why Sephiroth might be focusing on this particular dynamic between Tifa and Cloud and separate them.
Yeah. So speaking of it being a continuity of the original, in the first episode, we sort of refrained from talking about what was happening in the truck with Cloud because we didn't want to spoil the original. And I maybe don't really want to spoil it here either, but it sort of becomes pertinent or interesting in regard to the scene where Cloud attacks Tifa, because he's not just doing it because he's prompted by Sephiroth or made to suspect Tifa because of Sephiroth. He also does it using Sephiroth's direct mannerisms.
Yes.
He fights like Sephiroth, just like he moves like Zack in the truck. And we get this, of course, later once they wake up back in Gongaga village, that Cloud sort of talks about forgetting things and knowing things he shouldn't know. He doesn't know where he begins and some other people end. So that's sort of interesting in a way.
Yeah. And speaking of stuff like and Sephiroth, I just wanted to fuck. Jesus Christ. And I go. Just quickly in that underwater episode 1, Star Wars going through the planet core scene with Tifa, we actually meet what could potentially be the real Sephiroth. We're not quite sure, but he is fighting the weapon for supremacy, and is sort of having a hard time doing it. And this is the first instance of like we might actually be seeing the real Sephiroth, and it just turns out he's hanging out underwater, fighting the planet.
Yeah,
which is kind of cool. And Tifa sort of mentions to Aerith when she asks who's winning. For now, it's the planet.
Yeah, and I did like that dynamic as well, because we have the White Whispers and we have the Dark Whispers, and there's like a subterranean battle going on in the live stream as well as the one above ground, and I thought that was really cool. Nice reference to the planet core, by the way. I actually watched Phantom Menace.
The planet core.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not a bad film, man. I don't know why.
I love it.
Anyway, sorry, I'm going way off topic here. But I think the subterranean battle, the live stream thing, is very interesting, and we can sort of see. I mean, it feels like there's whispers that are aligned to Sephiroth, and Sephiroth is like sort of like managing or sort of like commanding this one aspect, and then you have like the good whispers and stuff, and all of that's taking place underwater, and then we see Sephiroth, as you say, kind of attack a weapon, which makes sense because weapons exist. I mean, their entire raison d'etre is they were formed to protect the planet, as Sephiroth is trying to sort of destroy that. Seeing him attack these weapons was cool.
Did you just imply that the White Whispers are good?
What is good? What is evil?
I said good and bad whispers.
Yeah. So which are the good ones?
Which are the good ones?
Okay.
That's the question.
Yeah. But this is the first time we see. So there are these two tendrils of fate that are. So there's a will of the planet, and there's a will of, I guess, Sephiroth and Genova, which is the Dark Whispers. And in remake, I mean, if we look backwards, is it the Dark Whispers that we see there? Because they are dark looking, but is that something they planned even then? I'm not even sure.
The remake Whispers, weren't they like gray?
Yeah, but they were not white.
No, but like gray can be the color in between black and white. So at least that's the way I thought about it. I felt like the remake whispers were gray, and this time around we have black and white whispers.
No.
So there's sort of there's a fork in the road in a way.
And irrespective of that, there's a definite duel of the fates going on.
Yeah. But one more thing about this subterranean thing. Do you know those cartoon shows where you're sort of inside the body and the white blood cells, they have personalities, and all these different elements of the body have personalities? It felt a bit like that.
That's a deep cut. This is a French cartoon that was shown in Iceland 25 years ago.
Okay.
There was also a recent anime that did this. I don't remember what it was called. But yeah, there are shows like that, and they are stealing from those shows. No, I'm kidding.
Interestingly, moving on, so when Tifa wakes up, Cloud is there by her bed. And as you mentioned earlier, he sort of actually vocalizes this worry about degradation and that he's sort of losing it slowly, and he finally sort of admits it. And then there's very nice moment when Tifa just says, "Go on, just like keep talking," and he does, and then the moment is ruined by Yuffie and Cait on the door yelling, "Kiss, kiss!"
Yeah.
Which sort of also cements in my head the idea that the others are feeling some sort of romantic connection between them, and they feel it too, and this famous love triangle of Aerith, Tifa, and Cloud is perhaps leaning towards Cloud and Tifa more in this sort of installment.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I feel that way. I mean, ever since playing the original game and stuff, it always felt more. And I done a recent discussion talking about whether we would consider or should consider Cloud and Tifa as canon going forward, because the reason I made that episode is because I feel more strongly than ever the actual writers want to go in that direction now. Is the vibe I'm getting. But the dynamics of Tifa and Aerith are really interesting, because Tifa is the girl next door trope of a romantic counterpart. Aerith was the meet cute, the Hollywood style, "Oh, I've fallen through the roof of your church," and that sort of romantic sort of meeting. So in the original they've always been built as this sort of equally kind of stereotypical way of meeting a girl. Now, yeah, I feel like I've always leaned towards Tifa. By the way, I felt the girl next door thing. I ever since first playing the game, that's just how I felt. Don't mind. I mean, I'm not in the dramatic spheres of that conversation, but it does seem to me like the writers are going in a Cloud and Tifa direction, and because it's a sequel rather than a remake, rather than keep that ambiguous, I wouldn't be surprised if they do sort of reconcile it one way or another somehow. Yeah.
Well, there's also a trope that sort of emerged between the original and this game, which is sort of the manic pixie dream girl trope, which wasn't really a thing in 1997. So we have this sort of free spirit Aerith running in the field, going like the Ramona Flowers in Scott Pilgrim, like the Jim Carrey movie with Kate Winslet. Sort of this sort of manic pixie dream girl that's sort of unreachable, and I think Aerith isn't quite there, but I can sort of see the echoes of that. It's sort of this sort of hippie. She thinks differently than the others, and she's a different breed than she's not like other girls and all that stuff. Yeah, and that trope didn't really exist as much in popular culture. Back then.
Just one thing I wanted to add about Tifa and this idea of the girl next door, which I think is perfectly acceptable, is that in Japan, this trope is known as Osananajimi, which is childhood friend, which of course the girl next door can be, or I imagine she can be, but it's this idea that you can develop a romantic interest or relationship between childhood friends, which is very strong. So it's not surprising that is being somewhat cultivated here.
But to avoid keeping this, making this episode 2 hours, we have exited the reactor. We wake up in Gongaga, and we have decided as a party to go to Cosmo Canyon.
Yes.
And in order to do that, we need a ride. And Yuffie throws up a smoke signal, and lo and behold, who shows up but Sid Highwind, a young, handsome, not very rough and gruff old man that I expected. But we get this handsome anime man.
Yeah.
What did you feel about that?
Much more amenable, much more amicable sort of Sid Highwind than we originally saw. Again, not to shamelessly plug myself too much, but I'd done an episode talking about how they handled certain characters in Rebirth, whether or not they fumbled them compared to the originals, how they held up to the originals, among which I discussed Dyne, who we've discussed earlier, and I raised some of those points there, but I also discussed Sid Highwind and how he's kind of radically departed from his original iteration. I got some feedback on that episode / backlash where people were saying, well, actually, because of how they've recomposed and reframed the story here, Sid is working with us in a professional capacity. Like, we literally pay him for his time for this ride we're taking. So he's not going to be swearing and brash and telling people to drink their goddamn tea because, you know, he is providing a service. So they're proposing that maybe he opens up a bit later.
Yeah, but it's not like he has much competition. Like, he's the only name in the game there, and so he can, like, pay me 1,000 gil or I'll just fucking leave you.
But this Sid actually fits more in with there's this classic trope with video games, anime video games, Japanese video games, where you go and you look up the ages of the characters, and they're all like 22 and 23, and Auron in Final Fantasy X is like 30 or something. Or he's old, that means he's 40 or something.
Yeah,
and Sid is actually, I forget. I think he's the old one, which means he's like 32 or something.
Yeah.
And this fits a lot more with that vision of Sid. Like, he's a 32-year-old. He's older, but he's still not an old guy. But when I played 7 in the original, like, in my head, it's like almost like he's got gray hair almost. It's like an old man.
Yeah.
But so this sort of version of him actually being in his prime, it sort of fits that a lot better, I think.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like when high school kids are making a short film and they can't get any adults to star in the film. So everybody's quite young. So I'm just saying that it might have felt nice to have a little bit of an older presence, a little rougher around the edges presence in Sid. But without that, everybody is quite nice looking and hot in the party.
Yeah, because I mean, it's such a significant aspect of Sid as well, because again, nodding back to the original game, he is like the surrogate leader in instances where we don't have Cloud around in periodic moments of that game. So there is that sort of maturity that's bound up with him as a sort of legacy character. And again, as you say, similar to, I suppose, like characters like Auron in Final Fantasy X, you need this mature figure around which all the naivety and stuff of the youth orbits, something to anchor them and propel things in a practical way.
Yeah. Just imagine if Auron had been like young and hot.
Yeah.
Like, it would not have served the character as well, I think.
No.
But one thing, speaking of the 1,000 gil, it's always interesting to me to sort of think about the economics of the game. So Cloud accepted a bombing terrorist mission for 2,000 gil, which is basically one way back and forth from Gongaga to Cosmo Canyon.
Yeah.
Not much consistency with that. But without, going into spoiler territory, but like Sid's, old Sid used to be a rough and tumble, gruff old man, and then it turns out, there's a really good reason for that, and he sort of goes into all the ways life has let him down, and this Sid that sort of jumps out of the plane going woohoo, and isn't sort of what I expected. But I haven't seen much of him at this point in the game, so I don't know how it'll change. You guys obviously know how this will develop. But to avoid this episode becoming way too long, we land in Cosmo Canyon, and we'll pick it up next episode from there. Nakwe, any last words?
Thanks for watching the 5th episode of this Final Fantasy VII Rebirth analysis. Don't forget to subscribe to the Birds of Play, and definitely don't forget to subscribe to Alleyway Jack.
Definitely don't.
Don't forget. But yeah, next time I imagine we'll be doing 2 chapters again. Hopefully that's not too much. This has probably been a long episode. Thanks for sticking with us. Until next time,
Cuckoo. Bye.
Okay, so should we maybe